Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, Pat Toomey, a Republican candidate for the United States Senate. Did he drive Senator Specter into the other party? But first, Jim Redmond from the Hospital Association. A little update on the Pennsylvania budget. All of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Before we get to Jim Redmond and, of course, Pat Toomey, shameless self-promotion, 12th year Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I want to thank our viewers all over the state. On WGAL, in the capital region, we're #1 in our time spot. More viewers than Face the Nation, more viewers than This Week with George Stephanopoulos, more viewers than what? Fox News Sunday. It's all about you. And, of course, great guests like the one sitting across from me, Jim Redmond, Senior Vice President with the Hospital Association. Jim, welcome as always.
Thank you, Terry.
All right. Not a lot of big news yet about the state budget. You know, it's sort of dribbling and drab, but, man, it's coming up, isn't it?
Sure is.
Well, what's the expectation? $3 billion deficit. Can we get this done on time? The we meaning, of course, the state, the legislature.
Well, you know, we haven't had an on-time budget in a number of years, and this one is really monumental in terms of its difficulty. The other week, the Senate passed its no tax increase budget that has some very dramatic cuts across the board on a number of important programs. And that is probably going to go nowhere within the House of Representatives. And we really want to see what the House is going to do with all of this.
Well, they're like, let's see, the governor recommended about $29 billion. He's using a good, several billions of stimulus money to help balance the budget. As I said, a $3 billion deficit, maybe $1.5 billion in change difference between the Senate. Is this a typical thing where the Senate Republicans, remember the House and the governor, Democrat, they're going to have to come together and it's going to be something in the middle?
Sure. I mean, in the end, this is a process of negotiation and compromise between the House and the Senate and the governor's office. The wide gaps in terms of philosophy about the role of government, huge concerns on the part of various groups that are dependent upon some of the government funds, and it'll be a real clash in terms of how this is going to be put together.
Well, let's talk a little more specifically about the health care side of it, something that I know you spend day in and day out doing. You got about $4 billion coming to the state for health care spending. Some of it will go for electronic record keeping. Some of it will go for COBRA, to extend coverage for people who lose their jobs, get laid off. But there's also an important piece that affects Medicaid in the hospitals, correct?
Well, the Medicaid program, which is designed for low-income individuals, is the largest payer of long-term care, nursing home care, and lots of hospital care for people without health insurance. Under the Federal Stimulus Act, there is an increase in the federal matching funds for that program, amounting to about $4 billion over a 27-month period.
Okay.
Now, you have to spend state money in order to get those matching dollars. With the Senate-passed budget, there's actually a decrease in state spending for the Medicaid program as it relates to hospitals. Therefore, you lose some of those federal matching funds.
Yeah, I was just going to say, then you can't take advantage of the money that the state would get through the stimulus. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out that the Senate-passed budget is really a first step in this whole process, or maybe perhaps said another step. The governor back in February released his budget. Usually the process of the budget is that the House passes a form of a budget, and then it's worked out between the leaders and the governor's office, and mid to late May into June, sometimes even into July.
Yeah, so no one is planning to take a vacation. I mean, at least
not
on June 30.
Nobody that I know that works in and around the state capitol has any plans for July other than to be in Harrisburg.
All right, before I let you go, I want to go back to where I started. Each year, the legislature has actually, during Rendell's years, has increased the budget over what Governor Rendell has recommended. This year, the Republicans in the Senate seem particularly intractable on that issue. If you had to sit here now, are we going to end up somewhere in between what Governor Rendell wants and the Senate Republicans, or do you think there'll be an overall increase?
Well, I think
that's a tough question. I know.
I think in terms of overall spending, yes.
Yeah.
How those monies are spent within the budget is another complicated question, and I think there's lots of negotiations that are going to occur about specific spending line items.
All right. Thanks for the great update. We'll be back. Pat Toomey is in the house. We're going to interview him. We're going to find out why he's running, what he stands for, introducing to the folks around the state. All of that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, joining me as my special guest is Pat Toomey. I think it's safe to say that he drove Arlen Specter out of what party? The Republican Party into the Democratic Party, sitting right across. Welcome, Congressman Toomey. 3 terms in the United States Congress, self-term limited.
That's right.
That's kind of unusual today. What's that all about?
Well, actually, I think the idea of a citizen legislature makes a lot of sense. I think that's what our founding fathers envisioned, and I think it's helpful in a healthy situation if people come out of the real world, serve for a limited period of time, and then go back to the real world.
You don't regret that?
Not in the least. Not in the least.
You know, Lehigh Valley congressman, you owned Rookies. I mean, you went to Harvard on a scholarship, right? Originally a Rhode Island guy.
That's correct.
And you moved to PA when?
1990. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you've been, Well, who knows? I mean, you know, you're in 1990 in our state. Well, you know, people tend to leave, not come in.
Yeah, no, I've been here for 20 years.
Okay.
This is home.
All right. Well, look, when you were in Congress, you once said there were 3 parties, Republicans, Democrats, and appropriators.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
Here's what I meant, because it's still true, unfortunately. I hope less so going forward. There's a culture in the Congress that is, actually, it's very worrisome to me. And the culture is that appropriators, who are the guys that get to define the spending bills and put in all the earmarks and all the special pork barrel projects, there's a culture of them sticking together no matter what, of them deciding who gets rewarded and punished with pork in their district, and a culture that they'll take the reprisal out on members that don't support their program. Sometimes I think the allegiance to the Appropriations Committee supersedes the allegiance to either of the parties, and it's not a healthy thing for taxpayers to be bribed with their own money.
So no earmarks for Pat Toomey.
No, I'm not. You know, I think we've got to really reform this system. I think it's wrong the way politicians go around increasing their own power at the expense of the taxpayers and with the taxpayers' own money.
Now, the Almanac of American Politics said that you ruffled feathers, that even when it came to the Bush tax cuts, you wanted bigger tax cuts, right? Is that true?
Well, I did. I think that there were some things we could have done better. One of the things that was a mistake about the first round of tax cuts is that they were phased in gradually. And what that does is it encourages people to postpone their income for that day when the rates are lower. So it wasn't surprising to me that after 2001, the first round of tax cuts didn't create the kind of boom that we did get after 2003.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Pat Toomey. If you were in the Congress right now, you would have opposed the TARP bailout of the basically investment banks. So I guess some commercial banks are going to get the money. You would have voted against the stimulus. Now, originally you were contemplating running for governor. All the comments around the state which one of those, if either of them, drove you to say, I'm not running for governor, I'm going to run for the Senate? Was there anything in particular that motivated you?
It's a combination of things. One was I heard from dozens and dozens of my supporters who said, Pat, we'll support you if you run for governor, but we think you can play a bigger role in the Senate. And part of what was happening, Terry, that I continue to be concerned about is that the federal government is taking our government in the wrong direction, our economy in the wrong direction. the bailouts are a big part of it. I think it's fundamentally wrong to force taxpayers to bail out failing companies. I think the spending has gotten, it's exploded. As you know, it's beyond anything that Republicans were guilty of, and Republicans were guilty of a lot.
Right.
So when I look at this lurch to the left on the part of this government, and the fact that Senator Specter was very happy to just go along and facilitate it, I thought, you know what, we need Republicans to provide some kind of check on otherwise unlimited Democratic control.
Okay.
And I can do that.
Now, in an interview earlier, when you were at the press club earlier, you said that the Federal Reserve must take a lot of blame.
Right.
Is that for the loosening of the credit and go ahead.
I think so.
Go ahead.
Well, here's what I think. Well, this is what absolutely happened, and why I believe it's a big cause of the problem we have. You know, the Fed kept Fed funds, the interest rate that they control directly. They kept it too low for too long. This is no longer this is becoming a consensus view. I think even Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, acknowledged this. From 2002 through 2005, they actually kept the nominal Fed funds rate, the rate that banks lend to each other overnight, lower than the rate of inflation even. That's almost unprecedented. It's very unusual. For a full year, they kept it at only 1%. And Alan Greenspan acknowledged in his book that they lowered rates below what the economy needed, and they ran the risk of creating a bubble. But he was so worried about deflation that he thought that was a risk worth taking. In the end, I think it did create a credit bubble and a real estate bubble.
Yeah, we only have 45 seconds left in this segment, but I want to ask you this. Would you then say that there should be greater efforts to regulate? The commercial banks are regulated, investment banks, minimal or no regulation. Would you support regulating investment banks, given what you...
Well, investment banks have a lot of regulations now already, although there are none left, right? The big 5 investment banks are all gone, right? True. They've either been bought or they've switched and become commercial banks. Right. So now it's really mostly a question about how to regulate commercial banks, of which we have an awful lot of regulators now. I think we need to look at that regulatory structure. I'm not sure we should have the half a dozen or so different regulators. I think we need strong oversight. I'm worried about the idea of too big to fail, because I think that has all kinds of sort of perverse incentives, and it creates a big problem. So we've got to take another look at our whole approach to regulation.
All right, when we come back, I want to ask the former congressman, what does he think about a public plan, a public health policy plan? We'll get into health care and some other issues following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm chatting with former Congressman Pat Toomey. He's running for the United States Senate on the Republican side. I think everybody in the state knows that by now, and they know, Arlen. We know what Arlen did. All right, I want to talk about health care. It's apparent that President Obama is pushing universal coverage to try to cover whatever the number is, 45 or 50 million Americans without coverage. And the big debate in Washington, one of them surrounding this, is a government-run health care plan. If you were a member of Congress, would you vote for a government health care insurance program? I think I got that right.
Of course, we already have a couple of those,
I
Medicare
understand,
and Medicaid.
But covering the
but no, I think it's a mistake for us to do that. And I think what that leads to immediately is a government rationing mechanism of one form or another. It means a bureaucrat that's going to be deciding what doctor you can see, under what circumstances, what treatment you can get, and how much they'll pay, and frankly, whether you're still young enough to get an expensive treatment that you may think you need, or your doctor might think you need. I just don't think we should put the government between patients and doctors. So what I think we need to do is we need some reforms that are going to lower the costs, give consumers more options, create an equitable tax treatment. As you know, employers get to deduct the cost of insurance they buy for workers, but individual families and workers can't. I don't think that makes sense. So I think there are a lot of things we can do to make health care more affordable and more available to people.
Would a priority for you, in addition to that, cover these 45 or 50 million? They're getting health care coverage in one.
That's a big part of the goal has to be to find a way to bring these people into coverage. I mean, they get treatment one way or another, but it's not the best way to do it. It's much better if folks have a reasonable insurance package. What I'd like to see, most of the people who don't have insurance do have jobs.
Right.
They have some income. Right. So let's work on making health care affordable and responsive to their needs so that it makes sense for them to be able to afford it.
All right, I want to go to Social Security. In the past, you had supported a private plan. Let me clear this. Would this be to replace Social Security to allow people to have a private retirement plans through the market, or would you say, in addition to Social Security, there ought to be an option for private investment?
It's the latter. Okay, I've never said that we ought to mandate this. I've always said this ought to be a choice.
Okay.
And it's a choice really only for younger workers. If you're already retired or close to retirement, there's no point in changing you can't change the rules. It wouldn't be right. But for younger workers, I think we need to acknowledge at some point that the current design is unsustainable. You know it's demographics. There just are not enough workers paying for every retiree as there used to be, and it's not sustainable. So I think younger workers ought to have that option of accumulating savings.
So let me make sure I understand this. Yeah. Would you still keep the younger workers in the Social Security system but give them an option in addition to Social Security, or would you phase out?
I'd keep them in the Social Security system and say, here's a choice that you will now have. The choice is to take some portion of your payroll tax. And I'm not sure exactly how much that'll be. It depends on a lot of moving parts. But take some portion of the payroll tax you already pay and put that into an account that would be professionally managed, be required to be diversified, and as a person got older and approached retirement age, would be required to become a very secure series of investments like bonds and CDs. That's what I think makes a lot of sense for young workers if they choose. And if they want to stay in the current system, then I'd be okay with that.
Okay. All right, I want to turn to another important, without doubt, in the next couple of years, in addition to the Supreme Court nominee that President Obama will announce in the next couple of weeks to replace Justice Souter, there will probably be at least two more, and who knows. You have said earlier that you didn't think that purely because someone was pro-choice on abortion that would be disqualifying. How far down that line would you go? How about if they're pro-choice, for gay marriage, for all of these? I mean, what is it that you would look to in terms of making a judgment as to whether or not you would support someone, you would vote to confirm someone on the Supreme Court?
I think it's not a good idea to look at any one single issue and say, that's my litmus test. I think the better thing to do is to look at the body of work of this person. What have they written? What have they thought about? What have they done? What are in the case of, as you know, most Supreme Court nominees have been jurists, so there's a record of their decisions. And what's very important to me is that we nominate people who understand the role of a court is not to legislate. It's not to make laws. That's the role of the accountable elected officials. Their role is to enforce them and to interpret the Constitution as it's written. I also am very concerned about jurists who get on the bench and think that the Constitution means whatever they feel like it means. I think that's a recipe
for... So no international law to you? No.
Actually, I don't think we should be subject to international law. No, I don't think that, I just don't think that's what should guide us. We have a Constitution that served us very, very well. And if we need to change it, we can amend it. That's perfectly fine. But frankly, whatever a Belgian court thinks, it's nice, but it's not terribly interesting to me.
Okay, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy. All right, we're going around a whole bunch of issues in a short period of time with Pat Toomey. He's running for the United States Senate. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Pat Toomey. He's a Republican candidate for the United States Senate, former member of Congress. Pat, let me go to one other issue. President Obama, there's this growing debate going on about the torture memos and whether they should have been released and what's going on with Guantanamo. Now the president decided that these photos more showing abuse of prisoners will not be released. Let's go through these one by one. Do you think that the president should have released the torture memos, the so-called torture memos, in which the explanations were given, the rationale for some of the interrogations that went on,
and some of the results of some of the interrogations where we got intelligence that actually helped thwart.
That's not been released.
That's not been released. I think that probably would be helpful to release that.
Right. So you think that
as long as it wouldn't jeopardize national security in any way, then I would be in favor of releasing
You think the president was right in his decision not to release the photos to make the ACLU go to the court?
Yes, I think the president made the right decision there. Yeah.
Okay, right decision there. Let's talk a little bit about Iraq. The timetable the president has set, or if you were in Congress, would you be comfortable with that?
I'd be resistant to have a hard timetable. I think what's more important is the events on the ground. And I think we've made enormous progress in Iraq. We're not home free yet, but it's a much more secure, much more stable, much more democratic society than it was just a couple of years ago. I would want to make sure that we left on a time frame that allowed it to continue to be stable, because if we left precipitously, then things could deteriorate, and God forbid we'd have to go back.
Yeah. There's a big debate now moving a little further east of Afghanistan about what America should be doing there. Do you support our continued effort in Afghanistan, enhanced, another 40 or 50,000 troops, beefing up our activity there? Do you in general support the president's policies?
As a general matter, I will say I do think that we have needed to increase our presence on the ground in Afghanistan. Yes, there's obviously a resurgence of the Taliban. That's a very, very dangerous movement, and so I think that's necessary. I think the president's right to put more resources there.
Philosophically, do you think we're at war? Do you think we are in a state of war right now with terrorists?
Well,
how would you characterize?
I think it was right to break from the idea of viewing these activities as criminal events that should be prosecuted, and rather to understand that this is bigger than that. It's bigger than a series of criminal events. There is a fringe, radical element of terrorists who I do think we are. They're at war with us, and we ought to acknowledge it.
You're welcome back anytime. Come back and join us. We did a real round robin with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Big issues. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.